This is part 2 of our interview with Sean Tracy, the technical director at Cloud Imperium Games, working on Star Citizen. In this part of the interview, we talk about CPU thread management, the jobs system, game logic, physics, things like that. And we also go into a lot of detail on the new character developments that will be shown, at least in part, at CitizenCon on October 9th. Before getting to this content, it is brought to you by Antec and their new Cube Mini ITX enclosure, which supports open-loop liquid cooling if you wanted it, and you can learn more about that in the link below. Let's get into the content.
So one of the other things that I was talking with Chris about for I think it sounded like, not 100% clear on this, it sounded like we would see some new character tech in
I'm excited about that. So it's not really, it's not new character, well, it is a little bit new, but
evolved or
mostly this is the stuff that we've been working on for years. So last year at CitizenCon we showed something we called the Morrow Tour. We had only just started to receive the head rigs, head assets from 3Lateral. It'd be about a month. And then we went ahead and just put 50 characters in. So, I mean, they look to varying degrees of art polish. And, I mean, a lot of games, we're pretty happy to show work in progress stuff, but the public can react pretty negatively to it. I mean, they're like, whoa, what is this game? Is that what character is going to look like? You know, they don't get it. So what we really want to show is the progress of that over the years. So all of the tech that we had expected is now online, polished, working. You know, we had the entire year to get about 120 scanned heads in, and we have, I mean, even just in the demo that we're going to show, we have 53 unique characters. So it's unique face, unique facial rig, all this. So
which is a lot of work.
It's a ton of work. If you just to contrast it again, like Crisis, we're talking, I mean, less than 20 characters the whole game. Rise, we're talking maybe 30, and like, you know, probably 15 of those are like barbarian variations and stuff like this, where for this, because we've got all these actors, you know, we've paid for the actors, so we're gonna have a really nice scan of their head, and we want them to look awesome within it. So and they do now. So all the tech is actually finally online for the faces to animate correctly, for it to get triggered with the dialogue. And finally, there was one really big piece of tech that we're bringing online now, and we call it runtime rig logic for the faces. What it means is we have varying facial skeletons, so everybody's got a bit of a different face. Now, a lot of games, what they end up doing is, okay, we're just going to unify the skull shape, we're just going to unify the neck shape, and everybody's the same. That doesn't work for actors, especially not for really recognizable ones like Gary Oldman or Gillian Anderson or Mark Hamill. Like, I mean, you're gonna know that doesn't really look like him. So what we do is we do still have all these unique rigs, but what we have is a system within the engine that is actually consuming unified animation data, and it applies all the offsets to that animation data so we can drive that rig. So what it means is that we can share animation across anybody, which is super cool. So a smile on Gillian Anderson is actually the same data for a smile on Mark Hamill, for a smile on Gary Oldman, for a smile. So we can share all this data across. So this is pretty big deal. The other thing with it is that we can procedurally drive things on the character and have the rig react as if we were just exporting animation. A big example of this is eyes. So what we have is this look IK that we can do. Sorry, not look IK. It's more of like a look posing system. I'll get into that maybe a little bit. So we'll drive actually where the eyes are looking. Problem with this is that the eyes are all connected to blend shapes, and we call it fleshy blend shapes all around the eyes. So usually if any other game would do this, right, you'd see the eyes moves around, but none of the blend shapes would do anything, because it just doesn't know that you're moving those eyes around, unless it was playing an animation, which would then know, oh, okay, well, I'm going to move those blend shapes around. So with rig logic online, we can say, move those eyes, and actually rig logic knows, oh, okay, I've got to blend this blend shape here, I've got to blend this blend shape here, I've got to do this wrinkle here, I've got to do this wrinkle here. So what we end up getting is a really awesome performance, even from procedurally generated data, right?
Is this stuff that would be reserved for more cinematic sequences, or is it everywhere?
Everybody. So this is so cool that so we apply this to every single head, and there's kind of there's a workflow reason for that, and it's that I kind of don't want to deal with two different pipelines. I don't want to do, oh, well, this guy's rig logic, and then, oh, well, this guy has a unique skeleton. So I'd rather just, okay, everybody's rig logic. perfect. Yeah.
Right.
So that means, and there's kind of an implementation reason too, because what I can do now is, say in Star Marine, I want a guy to, when he fires, he goes, like he looks angry, right? I would, if everybody has unique faces, I'd have to have, okay, this guy is in his stance, he's got his weapon, and he's firing. Here's angry face, male 01, angry face, male 02. They would all be different animations for the exact same thing. Now what I do is I just say 1, angry face, and then that will figure out what face it's playing on, and it will do it. So it's a lot easier. So this is kind of our whole mentality on content creation. It's let's do it intelligently so that we're not stuck here making thousands of things, so that it's going to take us 10 years to make this game. The game has never had.
How do you deal with system resource consumption for things like that? Like, just we were talking about the what did you call it for the eyes, the eye posing?
Procedure, yeah, the eye poses, yeah.
Yeah, so just that alone, if you're communicating eye movement to other meshes and things in the face, is that taxing on resources? Or?
No, because what we do, and it's a very good question, because usually if you were to move around verts and mesh and stuff like that, that would be a problem. So what we have is the rig logic skeleton is actually only 183 inputs. So based on those 183 inputs, we can drive everything on the face, and they give you an idea of the complexity of the face. It's not 183 joints, it's more like 500. So we're talking, well, and it's actually like 220 skin joints and then a bunch of the blend shape controls. So we use 183 joints to drive a way more complicated rig, but that logic exists in the engine, so we save all that performance is kind of the idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the character tech's a big thing. Head bob, is that something we should talk about?
Right. And it's actually the same guy is sort of working on the two systems. He's our animation R&D engineer. He's also come over from Crytek with a bunch of us, Ivo Hertzeg. So he's worked a lot on the vision stabilization. Now, Chris loves to talk about it in terms of the unified stuff, and there's good reasons for it. And again, I'd like to say this has way more to do with workflow than it does anything else. Again, if you don't have two different systems to deal with, you're kind of in a better spot. So a fire animation in third is the same as first, and there's a system dealing with it rather than me having to go grab the arms asset and then do the same thing on the body. It'd be super confusing to have to go back and forth between the two. So there's reasons for it. The biological term, anyways, for the eye stabilization is the vestibular ocular reflex. We've talked about this so much that we've gone through medical papers on it. We've read it.
Medical contractor.
Exactly, and really the easiest way to ever explain. And I think there's going to be a special video that Ivo does where he explains the sort of system where it's. Maybe you've seen this commercial of a chicken being held. And
I've seen that.
He keeps his head stable, right? As the thing moves around. So that's like the easiest analogy I have for the system. But Ivo definitely explains a lot more. But for me, it's more of a workflow thing. It just makes it easier to deal with. But there is run-ons. There's absolutely a bunch of run-ons, and especially having come from Crisis games where we did have some sort of separation, you've got to wrap your head around that workflow and be okay with it, because you can feel like you're chasing your tail a lot of the time. So, oh yeah, it looks great in the third person, then you get back to first, it's like, oh no, it looks shit in the first person, let's go back. And so you've just got to get into a spot where you're not chasing your tail, and it's usually pretty good.
So we've got procedural generation stuff is kind of covered to some extent. Character technology.
Yeah.
What's another good point for the CitizenCon stuff coming out? Anything?
Yeah, the procedural generations, character tech is super interesting.
What about these?
One point.
What about from an authoring standpoint, working on missions and things like that? So we're talking with Chris about Squadron 42 missions. So what's the authoring tool set or pipeline like for that?
Right, and no, it's a good question. It's actually not even embedded within Sandbox, which honestly, in my opinion, is a bad idea. I hate not putting stuff in Sandbox because it's just immediately available to you. But it is a hell of a lot easier, right? Because one thing, just for people's reference, and if they're pretty technical, Sandbox is written in old MFC. It's an old system from Microsoft. There's some plugins in it to write tool sets in Qt, which is a lot easier to write for, and it's a little more visually pleasing than MFC. You've just got no real control.
Right.
So a lot of times what happens when somebody comes along to write a tool for the engine, they're fighting more with Sandbox than they are with their actual tool, so they'll tend to write the tool outside of it, and then eventually we'll integrate it in. So what we have is a system that we call Subsumption. It's for AI, and it'll be used for missions, as well as even, I think, some economy stuff. It's a lot to explain it. It's kind of a visual scripting system.
Okay.
So you've got nodes within it. AIs have certain activities or behaviors that they can perform. They can be interrupted out of them. They can go into different behaviors. We can load them. We can cancel them. We can trigger off cinematic stuff. We can pretty much do everything that the flow graph would have done, but within a little more systemic of a system rather than a bespoke, this entity does this function, It's more of a behavior to the AI. So the same idea is going to be applied to the mission system, where it's a systemic system where you're setting up, I mean, if you think about them, and again, I'm not a designer, so I hope I don't, misrepresent their particular system. But when they're setting up missions, it's more of small portions of it that are kind of like little activities within, and that'll create the bigger mission. It's the same idea to the AI, so it's actually all done in the same sort of tool set. But yeah, it's all it's external to the Sandbox right now, which is, again, I hate, but I mean, it's easier for the guys to write it.
Right, yeah,
absolutely.
From a production
standpoint, yeah. No, I totally understand it, so that's an interesting one.
So with mission placement, how much of, do you know off the top of your head how much of this is sort of taking the same semi-automated approach versus all manual placement? Is there
everything is doing it? So this is a direction from the pretty much all the tech directors of the company. Most of us in a directorship role is that is a rule of thumb for everything we create, which is, can get it 90% of the way there with systems, and then let the artists and everybody polish that last 10%, right? So yes, it's exactly the same thing. You want to be able to bring as much content online as laissez-faire as possible, and then let designers go in and make it a little more fun. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think that it was the same, again, sort of the same mentality at Crytek. So I really hope that it lends itself to not only tons of content, but content that doesn't feel generic, right? It doesn't feel copy-pasted. It feels very living and immersive, I guess.
If you had to pick sort of one aspect of what we're going to see in the CitizenCon demo, from a technical standpoint, what do you think is the most important for onlookers to really understand as a big challenge to overcome?
I think the implication of V2 planets and what this brings. I mean, it's such a we as gamers, and even like I came from the modding side, so I didn't just jump into this as a programmer or anything. I've always been a gamer first, so I think we've just gotten used to the fact that we know we're being lied to. We know we're in a skybox.
Right.
We know that sun is just a little sprite up there.
Right.
Do you know, like, we know we're being lied to, and we're okay with it because it's fun and it looks good or whatever. But it really, to wrap your mind around the sheer volume and scale that is there in Star Citizen around you is something different. And it feels different when you're in it and experiencing it. If you could go into Witcher and just run forward for, it would, I don't even know how long it would take to get around a planet, but run forward for 24 hours and it actually be different, and then eventually come right back and wrap yourself around. It's a different mentality. So I think if there's anything to understand is the implication of the scale, meaning there's so much that you can explore and do. And without it being empty, is kind of a really, I think, important thing. Lastly, I would say really important to understand as well would be the AI implications of what we're going to show for the Squadron 42 preview, I guess. I'm not sure what Chris called it necessarily, but the AI that's going on within there is fairly complex because it's similar to an Elder Scrolls or something like that, where they live their lives. They have their lives. These are crewmates that they're at this desk from 9 to 6, and then they go to the cafeteria, and then they
Right.
go this. So what people I don't think will see immediately, and again, the demo can only be so long, I don't think people will necessarily grasp that that's happening for those characters. It will feel like it's just that he walks by you, great, that was that guy walking by you, but what you don't know is he's going down to his crew.
He's got an objective.
Exactly, he's got stuff to do. So yeah, I think that is a good question, but it was definitely those two I think would be important to understand what's going on there. Definitely.
Is all of that on a more hardware level? Is all the AI sort of on one thread of the CPU? Is that like?
Yeah, it's part of the job system. So we've got a really nice multi-threading job system. We can dedicate CPUs per module. We tend not to. We let the job system handle where it needs to go. Because what can happen with job systems is that, especially if you dedicate CPUs to it, they can sit there idle a lot of times. So they'll be sitting there waiting for work to do, and then they'll only get sort of given very small portions of that frame's work, and the rest stays on main or whatnot. So we try to move that stuff around with the job system itself. But yeah, it's all threaded. I mean, we definitely operate better on more CPUs. There's no question about that, especially in terms of physics as well. But yeah, the entire engine has been threaded from, since I think CryEngine 3 was actually when the job system went in. As soon as we had to do consoles for the CryEngine, we had to thread this thing. So,
So I remember speaking with Crytek about that. So they, several years ago at the sort of beginning of this project, added in support for 8 threads, which was like a
That's right. Yeah, it was a big deal. Yeah. No, I absolutely recall that, because we had hard coded basically, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but main thread would do one thing, render was on the main thread. Right. Then we had, I think we had a separate sound thread, physics thread, and then I don't even know.
Physics, like game logic.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and game logic was on its own thread. That was it. But yeah, that was a big deal. So now we scale dynamically to as many cores as you've got. So the more cores you got, the better it'll be. Right. I mean, if you get 32 cores, I don't think we even have so many that we would dispatch. I don't know.
Scales to a point, and then there's,
exactly.
As always, Right. I guess Core 1 probably still hauls a lot of the work as it tends to.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's even like, it'd be super simple if every single function in the engine was job system friendly or threading friendly. And it's just not the case, right? I mean, there are functions and systems, and we still find them every day that lock the main thread for whatever reason, right? It might be locking the main thread because it's waiting for another thread to finish for whatever data it's got to operate on. Because that is ultimately the problem with multi-thread programming. But we've got one of the best guys over from Crytek for that, whose name is Christopher Bolte, and he did I think it was his master thesis was on multi-threading. So and he wrote the job system and everything for CryEngine, and now he's on with CIG, so it's perfect, right? So
I've got one last kind of technical question for you, and we'll wrap up. But the last thing we were talking with Chris about was the sun. The idea that
that is really cool.
So so from just like a gaming standpoint, it's not something you really think of where when the sun moves, when you have a day-night cycle in Skyrim or something. Most likely
it's just in a skybox. Like I mean, it's just a position of a light, right? And really, all the sun is a light that doesn't have a convergence point, right? Where it's a parallel thing, so it just keeps going on forever. The tricky part about decoupling that is less about producing light from some point, but more about how the shadows react. Because in CryEngine, and this is why it was kind of complicated for us to pull the sun out of the sky, so to speak, was that we have the system called Cascaded shadow maps, and it's been around for a while, and a lot of people do use the same sort of system where you have kind of a really high res one, then it gets a little lower res around it, and you can see it as a bunch of concentric squares that would just be here's your first cascade, second cascade, third cascade, and each one gets a little less granular, is the idea, and the biases change and these sort of things. So we had to implement basically cascaded shadow maps on point lights, and then we could pull them out. What is kind of cool is that we actually have support for both systems right now. So as soon as I drag this, we call it, I think it's literally called sunlight. And then I drag the sunlight out, it actually turns off the one in the sky. So I can just delete that and it turns the sun back on. So we still have all the CryEngine time of day stuff, but we have also got the ability to still put our lights in. So it's kind of cool we got both supports. The other big bonus out of decoupling it is that we can have multiple suns. Couldn't have multiple suns before. You had either the
binary
sun,
system or something.
Exactly, binary systems, or even large events within there that you might want to produce light from.
Like an explosion or something?
Well, something gigantic, right? But big enough that you might see light from it. But I can think binary stars is kind of the more obvious usage of it.
Sure.
So that's an interesting thing from being able to decouple it. But it was a big deal because, again, you just got to get out of the mindset that you've got a skybox around you. You've just got to expand.
Well, I can see how you get sucked down the road too, because it's like any other rabbit hole.
Yes.
Like if you have some massive scale ship exploding or whatever that interacts with light, that would be...
How far do you see it?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And what kind of scales are we talking about? What LOD is that thing at? Do you produce light from it? Does it cast shadows?
Right.
Does it, there's a lot of question marks that you just got to... And honestly, a lot of the times is there's no one person to go ask, because very few things on this game have people done before. And I think that's why a lot of people really like working here, though. And it's challenging, but it's also why a lot of times we hit delays, because it just hasn't been done like this before.
Right.
And I kind of explain my day to people as I screw up all day until I don't. Do you know what I mean?
Well, that's my job too.
I break, broken. Oh, works, done.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's an iterative process. So I think that's what comes of it. But in the end, decoupling the sun was a real big one. I like that. But it's super weird though, because you can just drop one and put it like right next to a person.
Right.
And like the way the shadows react and stuff like that is like not at all what you would expect.
Right.
So it's like it's very strange at first, but yeah, no, it's an interesting thing. And the graphics programmers are amazing over in the UK is where most of our graphics guys
it's
are.
all
They're
graphic
awesome,
stuff.
so.
Yeah. Cool. So as always, more information. We'll have an article below with kind of key talking points, things like that.
Sure.
And I guess we might be seeing you guys at CitizenCon. Otherwise, we'll have coverage of it online separately. So
Awesome.
Tune in for that. Thank you for joining me, Sean.
You're very welcome. It was fun.
Yeah. We'll
All right.
see you all next time.